I want you to understand something before I tell you any of this. I am not a brave person. I am the kind of person who broke a 3-year streak of invisibility because the vending machine on floor 31 was out of order. I have never been the person who raises his hand first or speaks up in meetings or challenges authority in any meaningful way. I am the person who arrives 8 minutes early so I can avoid the elevator rush. I am the person who eats lunch at his desk because the break room feels like a stage I was never given a script for. I am Thomas Park, Level 4 Administrative Coordinator at Ardent Capital Group, and for 3 years, I have been almost completely invisible. Which is fine. Invisibility is safe. Invisibility is predictable. But invisibility does not protect you from exhaustion. And on the night this whole disaster began, I was so exhausted I could have wept into my keyboard. It was a Tuesday, quarter end, the kind of Tuesday where finance sends 17 emails before noon, all marked urgent, all contradicting each other, and you just sit there and absorb the chaos because that is your job. I had been at my desk since 7 in the morning. It was now 9:30 at night. The office had emptied out hours ago. The vending machine on our floor had been broken for a week, still waiting on facilities, and the communal coffee maker in the break room had burned a pot so badly that it smelled like regret and melted plastic. I needed coffee. Not want, need. The kind of need that bypasses rational thought. And that is the only explanation I have for what I did next. The executive lounge is on the 32nd floor. I'd been there exactly once 2 years ago when I was escorting a visiting consultant who didn't know the building. It had glass walls, low lighting, and a coffee machine that looked like it cost more than my rent. Real beans, imported, ground fresh. The kind of coffee that tasted like someone had decided to take the concept of morning seriously. I knew the keycard access was linked to your employee level. I knew mine wouldn't work, but the building's access system had been glitching all week. IT sent a memo about it, said certain card readers were accepting any active employee badge temporarily while they ran diagnostics. I had read that memo. I had filed that memo. I am an administrative coordinator. Filing memos is what I do. So I told myself, it's 9:30 p.m. No executive is in that lounge. It will take 4 minutes, you will get your coffee, go back downstairs, and finish the quarterly report, and no one will ever know. I was catastrophically wrong. I had just pressed the button. The machine was doing its thing, that glorious, expensive, meticulously engineered thing, when the door behind me opened and the lights, which had been on their evening dim setting, snapped to full brightness. I turned around. There were 5 of them, 5 men in suits that probably cost more than my annual bonus, and I recognized every single face because I file their meeting schedules, their board packets, their travel reimbursements. The board of directors, all 5, returning apparently from a dinner I had not known about. I later learned it was off calendar deliberately for security reasons, and looking at me the way you look at a raccoon you found in your kitchen at midnight. Chairman Aldridge spoke first. His voice is the kind of voice that has never once had to raise itself to command a room. Low, certain, surgically precise. "Who are you?" he said. Not asked, said. "And what exactly are you doing in here?" I opened my mouth, closed it. The coffee machine beeped cheerfully behind me, finished with its masterpiece, completely indifferent to my impending termination. "I work here," I said, which was technically true and also the most useless thing I could have offered. "On this floor?" "No, sir. 31. Administrative." The silence that followed was the loudest silence of my life. I watched the calculation happen behind Aldridge's eyes. Unauthorized access, company property, grounds for immediate dismissal, possible legal escalation depending on what I had seen or heard. I hadn't seen or heard anything. I had been alone in the room for 45 seconds, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the principle of it. "Security," he said, reaching for his phone. And then the door opened again. I had seen Leo Ashford exactly 3 times in 3 years, once at the all-hands in January from very far away, once in the lobby passing through, coat on, face arranged into an expression that discouraged all human contact, Once in the elevator, by accident, for 11 floors that I spent staring at the seam where the wall met the ceiling, because looking directly at him felt like looking at the sun. He's the kind of person whose presence changes the air in a room. I don't mean that romantically. Not yet. I mean it practically. People straighten up, voices lower. A kind of atmospheric pressure shift happens, subtle but unmistakable, like a weather front moving in. He was still in his full suit at 9:30 p.m. Of course he was. He took in the scene. Aldridge with his phone half raised, 4 other board members arranged in varying postures of disapproval, and me, frozen beside the coffee machine holding a cup I hadn't asked for permission to make, and something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, not quite. Something more like a rapid, silent recalculation. "Mr. Ashford," Aldridge began, "we found this employee in the lounge." "I know," Leo said. Calm, even, like a man defusing a bomb by simply refusing to treat it as a bomb. "He's with me." He's with me. 3 words. 3 words that detonated something in the middle of the room. I watched the board members rearrange their expressions, watched the question form on all 5 faces simultaneously, and watched Leo Ashford meet it with the same glacial composure he brought to everything else. "With you," Aldridge repeated slowly. "Yes." Leo crossed the room. He stopped beside me, close, closer than colleagues stand, and he picked up the coffee cup I had just made. He looked at me when he did it, and his eyes said something I couldn't fully translate yet, something like, "Play along, or we both lose." "He was waiting for me," Leo said, turning back to Aldridge. "I asked him to come up. We have work to discuss." A pause. Then, with the kind of precision that made the statement land like a closing argument, "Personal work. Personal work." The board knew what that meant. I could see it in the way Aldridge's eyebrows moved a millimeter up, then carefully back to neutral. The polite, powerful fiction of, "We will not pry into the private life of the man who signs our dividend checks," settled over the room like a silk sheet. "Of course," Aldridge said. "We'll leave you to it." They left. The door clicked shut. The coffee machine hummed to itself contentedly. And I stood there, in the executive lounge of Ardent Capital Group at 9:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, next to the CEO who had just told his board of directors that I was his secret partner. Leo Ashford set the coffee cup down on the counter, took exactly 3 steps away from me, and then turned around. Up close, I noticed things about him I hadn't before. The tiredness around his eyes that his composure had been trained to conceal. The way his jaw was set with a kind of permanent, practiced tension, like a person braced for a blow they'd stopped expecting to never come. "You work in administrative, 31. "Yes." "You accessed this floor using the keycard glitch." It wasn't a question. I answered it anyway. "Yes." "I need you to understand," he said, and his voice dropped. Not soft exactly, but stripped of its boardroom armor. "That what I just said had nothing to do with you personally. The board has been attempting to use my private life as leverage in governance discussions. I could not allow them to know I was alone up here at this hour." "Okay," I said, because I genuinely didn't know what else to say. "This means you are now in the position of knowing something about my situation." "I don't actually know anything." "You know that I invented a partner to tell my board." "I don't know that you invented anything," I said carefully. "I just know that you told them I was with you." He looked at me for a long moment, and in that moment I had the strange and unsettling sensation that he was not accustomed to people making fine distinctions on his behalf. That most people in his orbit said whatever the situation seemed to require, and this quiet, practical logic I'd offered was something he hadn't prepared a response for. "What's your name?" he said. "Thomas Park." "Thomas," he said at once, like he was filing it somewhere. "I'm going to need you to maintain this for a while." "How long is a while?" "Until the governance review is complete. 6 weeks." I thought about the broken coffee machine on my floor. I thought about the 17 contradictory finance emails. I thought about 3 years of invisibility, of arriving 8 minutes early, of lunch at my desk. Will I have access to the coffee machine? I asked. Something moved across his face. Not a smile, not quite, but the ghost of one. The memory of what a smile felt like, maybe, stored somewhere it hadn't been accessed in a long time. Yes, he said, you'll have access to the coffee machine. The thing about Leo Ashford that no one who feared him would ever guess, he works harder than anyone. I know this because for 6 weeks I saw it firsthand. The arrangement was careful, structured. Leo's assistant, a severe and discreet woman named Harriet, who had apparently seen enough of his life to be unflappable, was briefed and folded in without ceremony. I was added to his calendar as a recurring evening block, classified ambiguously as personal. We met in the executive lounge or the private conference room on 32, and we did actual work, because Leo Ashford was constitutionally incapable of wasting time. He didn't explain himself. He didn't make small talk. He handed me documents and said, "Your thoughts." And when I gave them, he listened in a way that was slightly unnerving, completely still, completely focused, like every word I said was being weighed and cataloged. I learned the shape of his days from the margins. He arrived before 6 every morning. He ate at his desk if he remembered to eat. His calendar was a monument to obligation. Board meetings, investor calls, regulatory briefings, strategy sessions, every minute assigned, every hour purposeful. There was not a single block in his week that could be classified as rest. One night in the 3rd week, I said without thinking, "When did you last take a day off?" He looked up from his laptop. "Why?" "You look tired." He looked at me like no one had said that to him in a very long time, and maybe they hadn't. When you were the CEO of a $4.2 billion asset management firm, people tell you you look decisive or focused, or occasionally intense. They do not tell you that you look tired. Tiredness implies limit. Limit implies vulnerability. Vulnerability is the one thing every person in his orbit is trained to pretend they don't see. "I functioned fine on 5 hours," he said, and went back to his laptop. That's not what I asked. He didn't answer, but he also didn't tell me to mind my own business, which I was beginning to understand was a significant thing for him. Silence from Leo Ashford was not emptiness. It was a form of permission. I started finding coffee on my desk. Not always. 3-4 times a week, I would arrive to find a cup from the cafe 2 blocks away, the good one, the one with the rotating single origin menu, sitting at my workstation with my order, a long black, 2 sugars, the way I make it in the executive lounge every night. No note, no name. The first time I thought it was a mistake. The second time I checked with the building's reception. They said the delivery had come through the executive account. I sat with that information for a full minute before I understood it. He had noticed. Somewhere in the careful inventory of observations he made about everything, he had noticed what I ordered, and he had decided, quietly, without announcement, as though it were simply logical, to make sure I had it. I didn't say anything about it, not right away. I didn't know how. This was not the kind of man you walked up to and said, "Thank you for the coffee, it means something to me." He would have looked at me with those careful, controlled eyes and said he was simply ensuring that an asset to his current arrangement was adequately maintained, or something equivalently armored. But I started leaving earlier in the mornings, just by a few minutes, just enough to be at my desk when the delivery came, on the off chance that one day he might walk it over himself. He did once. A Friday morning earlier than usual. I looked up from my monitor and he was standing at the edge of my floor in his coat, clearly not yet at his desk, clearly having come here first, holding the cup. He looked at me. I looked at him. He walked over, set the cup on the corner of my desk, and said, "The cafe said they were out of the Colombia roast today. It's the Guatemala, similar profile." Then he left. I put both hands around the warm cup and stared at the wall for a while. It started small, the way real things always do. The 3rd week, after a late strategy session, we were both sitting in the conference room, him at the head, me to his right, the way we'd settled into without discussing it, and the building had gone fully quiet around us. It was past 11. He'd been working without pause since 8 that morning, and even the architecture of his discipline, that iron framework he'd built around himself, was showing cracks. I noticed it when he stopped typing. Not to read, not to check something, just stopped. His hands rested on the keys. His eyes were open but not focused. He was somewhere else, in the way people go when the body has finally overridden the will. I didn't say anything. I kept working. And then, slowly, so slowly that I might have imagined it had I not felt the warmth, he listed slightly to his right. His shoulder made contact with mine. And then, by increments, his head followed. Just the weight of it, resting against my shoulder, the way someone rests when they've run out of reasons not to. I did not move. I did not speak. I barely breathed. I don't know how long we sat like that. 5 minutes, maybe 10. My neck started to ache from holding still. I didn't care. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, the city blinked and moved and kept its own time. And in here, Leo Ashford, who feared nothing and allowed nothing and kept every part of himself behind a wall of composure that I suspected had been built brick by brick over a very long and very lonely life, was asleep on my shoulder. I reached very carefully across the table and closed his laptop. When he woke up, it was perhaps 15 minutes later. He lifted his head with the deliberateness of a man who will not, under any circumstances, acknowledge that the last 15 minutes happened. He straightened his jacket. He opened his laptop. He cleared his throat. "The restructuring memo," he said, as though we were mid-sentence. "Page 11 has a formatting inconsistency." "I'll fix it," I said. We did not discuss it, but the next evening, when he sat down, he sat a little closer to my right. Here is the thing about a secret. It makes you hyper-aware of everything. I became a kind of expert in the covert language of proximity, the brief, warm pressure of Leo's hand over mine when he passed me a document in a public meeting. Quick, disguised as reaching, but deliberate in the way a man who was never accidental can only be deliberate. The way he positioned himself between me and a conversation he knew I found draining whenever we were in the same room. The slight tilt of his chin that meant, "Look at me," deployed in rooms full of people who were all looking at him, and none of whom noticed where his gaze actually wanted to land. On my floor, people noticed the coffee. They noticed that I had begun attending 32nd floor briefings that weren't strictly within my job scope. Gossip is the one currency that compounds faster than interest in a financial firm, and the whispers had begun. Thomas Park is having an affair with someone senior. No, he's angling for a promotion. He's too quiet for something like that. The quiet ones are always hiding something. I was sitting in the break room one afternoon, actually in the break room because the coffee machine had finally been fixed, when I heard 3 of my colleagues discussing me with the casual cruelty of people who are not unkind but have not thought carefully about where sound travels. 3 years and nobody knew his name. Now suddenly he's on 32 twice a week, said one voice. I'm just saying. He probably knows something or someone. I feel a little bad for him, actually. Whatever it is, it never ends well for the... Thomas. The voices stopped. I came around the corner, cup in hand, and found 3 of my colleagues frozen in the particular way of people who had been caught. I knew all 3 of them. We were not close, but we were courteous, and the space that had opened in the break room held a specific kind of shame. Theirs, not mine, though it didn't feel that way in the moment. I was trying to find something to say. Something that was not wounded, something that preserved the professional equilibrium we'd need to maintain for the next however many years, when the break room door opened again. Leo walked in. He did not look at my colleagues, he looked at me. And in the clean, unhurried way he had of assessing a situation entirely before engaging with it, he crossed the room, refilled the coffee cup I was holding from the freshly fixed machine, and said, without inflection but with absolute clarity, "You're late. The Meridian call starts in 5 minutes." There was no Meridian call. I knew it, he knew it. "Right," I said. "Sorry." He held the door for me. We walked to the elevator together. He did not speak until the doors closed. "How long has that been happening?" he asked. "A while. I should have..." He stopped. Started again, with slightly more care. "I should have been more considered about the visibility of this arrangement. It's fine. It isn't." He said it with a firmness that was not argument, but something else, something closer to an acknowledgement of fault, which, from Leo Ashford, was the equivalent of anyone else falling to their knees and apologizing in 4 languages. That night, he approved my lateral transfer to a role on 32, project liaison, reporting to Harriet, full clearance for the executive floor, a real position with real scope, and a salary adjustment that made me sit down when I saw it. He didn't tell me it was protection, but I knew. The same way I was beginning to know everything about him, by the negative space of what he didn't say. He started living lunch at my desk. Not every day, but often enough that I began to recognize the small brown bags from the Japanese place near the financial district, the one I'd mentioned once in passing, when he'd asked where I liked to eat, and I'd said it with the particular tone of a person naming something they consider a luxury treat, rather than a regular habit. He had a standing account there. I checked, eventually. The order was always right, not just my usual, but calibrated to the day. Heavier meals when the calendar was brutal, lighter when the afternoon had breathing room, as though he had built a secondary algorithm running quietly alongside all his other calculations, tracking the data points of what Thomas Park needed on any given Tuesday. I never said thank you directly. I started leaving his reading glasses on top of his laptop whatever he left them on the conference table, which was always because he refused to accept that he needed them and would spend 20 minutes squinting at print rather than admit it. I started including page summaries in the documents I passed him because I'd noticed he skimmed better than he read linearly, and the summaries let him move faster. Small things, practical things, things that said, "I am paying attention" in the only language I thought he might believe. One evening, he picked up a summary I'd written, read it, looked at me, and said, "You understand the way I work." "I've been watching," I said. Another ghost of something on his face, closer to a smile this time, almost arriving. "Most people are afraid to watch me," he said. "I noticed," I said. "It seems lonely." He looked at the summary for another moment. Then he set it down and said, very quietly, "It is." The sneaking started because the building was never truly empty. There were always maintenance workers on one floor or another, security rounds, the occasional overnight analyst burning through a deadline. And so the executive lounge, which had been our sanctuary, became the place where we were most likely to be seen in a context that exceeded the plausible professional. So we learned the building's rhythms. The east stairwell on 31 was a dead zone, no cameras, bad lighting, used only when the elevator was slow. We discovered this separately and started ending up there simultaneously without either of us suggesting it. The first time Leo kissed me was in the east stairwell on 31. I want to tell you it was cinematic. I want to give it the weight it deserved, but the truth is it was Tuesday again. It always seems to be Tuesday, and we were on the stairs because the copy room had been occupied, and he'd been handing me a folder of revised projections, and I'd said something about the numbers on page 3 that made him stop and look at me in that specific way he had, that way that said, "When did you become the place I want to look?" And then there was no more distance between us, and he was kissing me with the same focused, complete attention he brought to everything, and it lasted only a moment, brief and certain, before he stepped back and straightened his jacket. We looked at each other. "I should apologize," he said. "Please don't," I said. He didn't. We were bad at hiding it, or rather, we hid it technically, professionally, in every way that could be observed and documented. But the human register of things is more sensitive than security cameras, and people who work closely with other people learn to read the small physics of connection. Harriet, I think, knew from the second week. She never said anything, but she began scheduling certain meetings with a buffer afterward that she'd never included before, and she stopped sending me the standard "Mr. Ashford is unavailable" reply to my messages, which meant she'd changed the routing on his inbox flags without being asked. The analysts on the 32nd floor noticed that whenever Thomas Park was in a room, Mr. Ashford stood 3 degrees differently, minute, imperceptible to anyone not paying careful attention. But analysts are paid to pay careful attention to signals, and the signal was orientation, the way a compass needle doesn't announce itself, it simply points. They didn't speak of it. There was an instinct, I think, that speaking of it would disturb something fragile, and maybe it would have. But then came Marcus Hale. Marcus Hale was a rival investor. I'd seen his name in the documents long before I saw his face, Hostile acquisition proposals, minority stake challenges, regulatory complaints filed with a frequency that suggested strategy rather than grievance. He was the kind of man who understood that information was leverage, and leverage was the only currency that couldn't be devalued. He came to the building officially, on board business, representing a minority consortium. He sat across from Leo in a conference room I was not technically supposed to be in, and he talked about corporate governance, restructuring proposals, and leadership accountability. All of it textbook. Then, at the end, he opened a folder and placed it on the table. Photographs, lobby cameras, hallway angles, and the east stairwell, which I now knew was not entirely camera-free. Leo and I. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be called explicit, but his hand at the small of my back in a hotel lobby corridor from a board dinner 2 weeks prior, where we'd arrived separately and left separately, but had, for 30 seconds in the corridor, walked close enough to touch. My hand over his on the conference table. The stairwell moment, not the kiss, just the proximity, the angle, the unmistakable body language of two people in each other's gravity. "I think," Marcus Hale said pleasantly, "that the board deserves to know whether its CEO has been conducting a personal relationship with a direct access employee. For governance reasons, you understand." Leo looked at the photographs. He looked at Marcus Hale, and then he did something I had never seen him do in a confrontation. He was quiet for a long moment that had nothing strategic in it. A real pause, a human one. I thought he was calculating how to deny it, how to neutralize the threat, how to build a wall around this the way he'd built walls around everything. Then he closed the folder. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," he said. Hale smiled. He began to speak, already moving toward terms, toward the leverage this gave him. "I'll be calling a board meeting this week." Hale paused. "Regarding a formal disclosure under the related party policy. Thomas Park is my partner. I intend to make that formal and on the record." He picked up the folder and handed it back to Hale with the calm of a man returning something he'd decided he didn't need. "You can keep these. We have nothing to hide." The room was very quiet. I was sitting at the far end of the table in my new capacity as project liaison, and I was looking at him, really looking at him, not the CEO, not the man with the wall and the iron composure and the 5 hours of sleep and the careful, distant authority, but him. The tired and hungry and particular him, the one I'd been collecting in fragments over 6 weeks of late nights and morning coffee and stolen quiet in a stairwell. He didn't ask me, formally, in the way of speeches or declarations. That was not who he was. He was a man who communicated in gesture and presence and careful, chosen proximity, and the asking happened the same way everything between us had happened, slowly, sincerely, with a kind of weight that made the ordinary feel like ceremony. It was the Friday after the board meeting, which had gone as Leo expected. Clean disclosure, formal documentation, review committee satisfied, Hale's leverage neutralized. The building was quiet. The rain was steady. I was making coffee in the executive lounge because I had access to the executive lounge now, legitimately, and I was still not entirely used to the normalcy of that.
He came in while the machine was running. He sat on the couch, the long one by the window, and he looked at the city, and he looked tired, genuinely tired, the way a person lets themselves look when they've stopped performing composure. I brought the coffee over, sat beside him, handed him his cup, black, no sugar, the way he took it. We sat there and drank coffee and listened to the rain and said nothing for a while. "Was it real?" he said, eventually. Not asking if what I felt was real. Asking, I think, if this, the version of his life that had me in it, was something that could hold its shape outside of circumstance, outside of necessity, outside of 6 weeks of pretend. "It was real for me before it was useful," I said. He turned his head and looked at me, and this time he didn't look away. He kept looking, in the steady, unguarded way he almost never let himself look at things, and I let him look, because I had nothing to hide from him. I never had. He put his cup down. He reached over and took my hand, not urgently, not dramatically, just took it. The way you take something you've been wanting for a long time but have been making yourself wait for, because waiting felt like the responsible thing. And then at some point, the waiting became its own kind of loss. I ordered the Columbia roast for Monday, he said. The cafe gets it on Fridays. I laughed. Actually laughed in the real way, not the polite, professional way I'd spent 3 years perfecting. That's what you want to say right now? I've been thinking about the coffee, he said, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Lighter, careful, new. Since Tuesday, the first one, you looked at that machine like it was the only good thing left in your day. It was, I said, and then you showed up. Was that better or worse? He asked, and I could hear it, the genuine question underneath the quiet. The man who had never been certain that his presence added to a room instead of subtracting from it. Better, I said, significantly.
He squeezed my hand once. Then he leaned back into the couch, and then, with the deliberate, unself-conscious naturalness of a person finally permitting themselves something they've been rationing, he rested his head on my shoulder. This time, I didn't hold my breath. I turned my head slightly and rested my cheek against his hair, and we sat there while the rain moved over the city, and the coffee cooled, and the coffee machine on the counter sat dark and satisfied and completely at peace. Epilogue. They know now. The whole office. Or rather, they knew before the announcement, the way offices always know, through accumulation of small evidence and the particular attention that people pay to the things they've been told not to notice. The formal disclosure just gave everyone permission to stop pretending they hadn't noticed. The reactions were what you'd expect. Some warmth, some curiosity, a few carefully neutral faces from people who were working out the politics. One very earnest email from a junior analyst asking if the lateral transfer process had changed. My 3 colleagues from the break room came to find me individually, over the course of a week, with varying degrees of sheepishness. I told each of them that I understood, and I meant it, and I moved on, because you cannot build a life at an organization by carrying grievances, and I had more interesting things to carry now. Leo, for his part, changed almost nothing about his external conduct. He is still precise and demanding, and constitutionally incapable of wasting anyone's time. He still arrives before 6, he still eats at his desk, he still speaks in board meetings with a clarity that makes other people want to stop talking just to listen. But every morning, there is coffee on my desk. He brings it himself now. Most days drops it at the corner without ceremony, doesn't wait for acknowledgement, goes to his own office. Harriet has told me, with the dry affection of a woman who has seen everything, that he checks the cafe's roast calendar every Thursday. He rests his head on my shoulder when we're working late, and the hour gets past the point where composure seems worth the effort. He finds reasons to be in whatever room I'm in, positioned so that from a certain angle, in the particular light of late afternoon, I can see the side of his face when he doesn't know I'm looking. And sometimes, in those moments, I see something that I don't think anyone in this building, maybe anyone in his life, has seen before. He looks content. Not happy in the performed, pressured, projected sense. Content. At rest. Like a person who was found, after a very long search they never named, the place they were going toward. I still don't think of myself as brave. I'm the person who arrives 8 minutes early. I'm the person who files the memos and eats at his desk and moves through the world without requiring much of it in return. I'm Thomas Park, and I snuck into the executive lounge on a Tuesday night because I was tired and the vending machine was broken, and I needed coffee so badly I bypassed every reasonable instinct I had. And because of that, because of one very specific cup of very excellent coffee, I ended up here, in a life I wouldn't have written for myself, with a man I wouldn't have known to want, building something quiet and real and ours in the space between a pretense and the truth. The Colombian roast is very good, by the way. Worth it. Every bit of it. Worth every single Tuesday. The end.